It's Saturday, February 7th, 2026, and meteorologists across the globe are confirming what many of us have feared for weeks. A major sudden stratospheric warming event is now in progress, and the polar vortex is collapsing in real time. This is not a drill. This is not speculation. This is happening right now, and the implications for the weather patterns across North America and Europe over the next month are absolutely staggering. The stratospheric warming that began in late January has now reached critical intensity, with temperatures in the Arctic stratosphere jumping by more than 50 degrees Celsius in just the past few days. And the normally stable polar circulation that keeps Arctic air locked away at the North Pole is completely breaking down. What we're witnessing is a textbook polar vortex split, where the massive circulation of cold air that normally sits like a spinning top over the Arctic is literally tearing apart into multiple pieces. And those pieces are now migrating southward, carrying with them some of the coldest air on Earth, directly toward heavily populated areas of the United States and Europe that are completely unprepared for what's coming. The science behind what's happening is both fascinating and terrifying. The polar vortex operates like a giant atmospheric container, normally spinning at speeds that create winds of over 200 miles per hour in the stratosphere, about 30 kilometers above the Earth's surface. When this circulation is strong and stable, it acts as what scientists call the keeper of cold, effectively locking Arctic air in place around the North Pole where it belongs. But when waves of energy from the lower atmosphere push upward into the stratosphere, they can disrupt this delicate balance, causing the vortex to wobble, stretch, and eventually split apart completely. What makes this particular event so concerning is not just the fact that it's happening, but the timing and intensity. We're looking at a stratospheric warming event that is ranking among the strongest on record, with ensemble forecast models showing that the disruption to the polar circulation could persist well into early spring. The downward propagation of this stratospheric chaos typically takes 1 to 3 weeks to fully manifest at surface levels where we live and breathe. And early indicators suggest we're already seeing the preliminary effects across the eastern United States and parts of Europe. The immediate impacts are already becoming apparent across multiple regions. Temperature anomalies of 20 to 30 degrees below normal are being forecast for large swaths of the central and eastern United States, with some areas potentially seeing readings that haven't been recorded in over a decade. The Arctic Oscillation and North Atlantic Oscillation, two critical climate indices that influence weather patterns across the Northern Hemisphere, are both plunging into deeply negative phases, which historically correlates with prolonged periods of bitter cold and increased storm activity across continental regions. What's particularly alarming is that this collapse is occurring against the backdrop of an already brutal winter season that has seen multiple historic storm systems impact the same regions now facing this new threat. The Carolinas, which just endured their heaviest snowfall in decades from Winter Storm Gianna, are now looking at the possibility of Arctic air masses that could bring temperatures not seen since the 1980s. Cities like Charlotte and Raleigh, which recorded over 20 inches of snow in some areas just weeks ago, could see temperature drops that make the recent cold snaps look mild by comparison. The European situation is equally concerning, with forecast models showing a massive ridge of high pressure developing over Greenland and the Arctic that will effectively redirect the jet stream in a way that funnels bitter cold air directly into northern and western Europe. The United Kingdom, Ireland, and northwestern continental Europe are all in the crosshairs for what could be their coldest February in recent memory. But the real story here is the duration and persistence of what's coming. Unlike typical Arctic blasts that might last a few days or a week, the disruption we're seeing in the stratosphere suggests this pattern could lock in place for several weeks or potentially even into early March. The Canadian long-range model, which has been remarkably accurate this winter, is showing continued cold air support over Western Canada and much of the United States extending well into February, with temperature anomalies that would represent a return to what meteorologists are calling old-school winter conditions. The atmospheric mechanics driving this event are complex, but can be understood through a simple analogy. Imagine the polar vortex as a spinning balloon filled with the coldest air on Earth. When you squeeze that balloon from the outside, it elongates and portions of it get pushed away from the center. That's essentially what's happening now. Massive high-pressure systems in the stratosphere are acting like giant hands squeezing the polar vortex, causing portions of it to stretch southward and eventually break off completely. The three-dimensional analysis of this breakdown shows Arctic air being displaced in multiple directions, with the largest lobe headed directly for North America. This displaced air mass is forecast to bring temperatures that could drop 40 to 50 degrees below normal in some regions, creating conditions that haven't been experienced since some of the most memorable Arctic outbreaks in modern meteorological history. What makes this situation even more dangerous is that it's occurring during a period when infrastructure across much of the affected region is already strained from previous winter storms. Power grids that are still recovering from ice damage, heating systems that have been running at maximum capacity for weeks, and transportation networks that haven't had time to fully clear from recent snow events are all about to face another severe test. The timing of this collapse also couldn't be worse from a preparedness standpoint. Many people have already exhausted their winter emergency supplies dealing with the previous storms, and supply chains for everything from heating fuel to emergency food supplies are still disrupted from earlier weather events. The combination of extreme cold, potential power outages, and limited resources creates a perfect storm of dangerous conditions. Early indicators from the Winter Storm Severity Index are already showing moderate to major impacts forecast across a huge swath of the eastern United States, with some areas showing extreme impact potential. This index takes into account not just snowfall amounts, but wind speeds, ice accumulation, and duration of impacts, and what it's showing for the coming weeks is genuinely unprecedented for this time of year. The agricultural implications are also staggering. Farmers and livestock operations that have already been struggling with previous cold snaps are now facing the prospect of temperatures that could persist below freezing for weeks on end. Citrus crops in Florida, which barely survived the recent cold outbreaks, could face complete devastation if temperatures drop as low as some models suggest. For urban areas, the challenges will be immense. Cities like Chicago, Detroit, Minneapolis, and Milwaukee are all forecast to experience their coldest February in years, with potential for daily high temperatures that never climb above 0 degrees Fahrenheit for extended periods. The energy demand for heating during such extreme cold puts enormous stress on power grids, and any failures during these conditions become life-threatening emergencies within hours. The transportation sector is bracing for widespread disruptions that could last for weeks rather than days. Airlines are already proactively canceling flights, knowing that the combination of extreme cold and potential snow events will make normal operations impossible. Railway systems are implementing cold weather protocols that slow operations significantly, and highway departments are stockpiling road salt and sand supplies that they expect to deplete rapidly. What's particularly concerning from a public safety perspective is that many people simply aren't prepared for this level of sustained cold. The previous storms this winter were relatively short-duration events that, while dangerous, didn't require the kind of long-term survival planning that this type of polar vortex collapse demands. Heating bills that could triple or quadruple, potential for frozen pipes that could take weeks to repair, and the real possibility of extended power outages during life-threatening cold create scenarios that most people have never had to consider. The meteorological community is treating this event with the highest level of seriousness, with multiple agencies issuing special advisories and extending forecast periods specifically to address the unprecedented nature of what's developing. The National Weather Service has already begun issuing preliminary warnings for areas that could see temperature records not just broken, but shattered by margins that redefine what's considered extreme for those locations. Looking at the extended forecast models, There's growing consensus that this pattern will persist well beyond the typical duration of winter weather events. Some projections show the potential for Arctic air to remain entrenched across large portions of North America through the third week of February, with only gradual moderation expected as we move toward the end of the month. The global implications of this polar vortex collapse extend far beyond just cold temperatures. When Arctic air masses this large and this persistent move into mid-latitude regions, they fundamentally alter atmospheric circulation patterns on a hemispheric scale. This can trigger feedback loops that influence everything from storm tracks to seasonal temperature patterns for months to come. What we're witnessing represents a perfect example of how small changes in the upper atmosphere can cascade into massive disruptions at the surface level where human civilization operates. The energy waves that initially triggered this stratospheric warming event were relatively minor atmospheric disturbances, but their effects have now amplified into a planetary-scale reorganization of winter weather patterns. The economic implications are staggering and will be felt across multiple sectors for months to come. Energy markets are already responding to the prospect of sustained heating demand. Agricultural futures are reacting to potential crop damage, and transportation companies are implementing contingency plans that assume normal operations will be impossible for extended periods. For millions of people across the affected regions, this polar vortex collapse represents a fundamental shift from the relatively mild winters that many have become accustomed to in recent years. The return to true Arctic conditions serves as a stark reminder of the power of natural atmospheric systems and the vulnerability of modern society to extreme weather events. The preparation time is rapidly running out, and the message for meteorologists across the board is clear. This is not a typical winter weather event that will pass in a few days. This is a sustained pattern shift that demands serious preparation and respect for the dangerous conditions that are now inevitable across much of the Northern Hemisphere.